You did everything right during your pregnancy. You read all the books. You took your prenatals. You even ate beef liver. And you went to every single appointment. But nobody told you the single most physically traumatic event that your child would ever experience. It was being born. And here's what's even more heartbreaking. The medical system doesn't look for the damage that it causes. They don't measure the neurological impact. They don't test for it. They just send you home and hope that everything works out. But when your baby won't latch, when they can't sleep, when they scream for hours, or they develop colic and reflux, or when your toddler hits developmental delays, your school age kid struggles with focus and behavior, or your teen battles anxiety, depression, or sensory overload, nobody connects it back to what happened on day one. And this is the truth that most doctors will never tell you. Birth trauma isn't just about broken bones or NICU stays. It's about invisible nervous system damage and dysfunction that shows up as behavioral problems, as developmental delays, and chronic conditions years later. So this video is going to be for every parent who's been told that their child will grow out of it. Whether you have a colicky newborn that won't nurse, a toddler with speech delays and sensory issues, a school-age child labeled as difficult, or a teenager that's drowning in anxiety. This is for parents who know something happened but can't figure out what, and especially for those who had birth interventions and are now connecting the dots that nobody else will connect for them. Last week, a mom sat in my office sobbing. Her 7-year-old had just been diagnosed with ADHD and anxiety, and the school wanted medication. Therapists said that they needed more interventions, but when I asked her to walk me through his birth story, everything started to click for this mom. There was an emergency C-section after 18 hours of labor. There was a vacuum extraction attempt that failed first. Baby came out not crying, struggling to breathe. NICU for observation, wouldn't latch, constant reflux, never slept for more than 45 minutes at a time. And she'd been told that all of that was, you guessed it, normal, that he would grow out of it. But he didn't grow out of it. It evolved. The colic and constipation became chronic ear infections. The reflux became picky eating and bigger digestive struggles. The sleep difficulties became behavioral and emotional meltdowns. And those sensory sensitivities became focus problems and emotional dysregulation. And this is what nobody had ever told her. All of it traces back to the physical stress and trauma that his nervous system experienced during birth. Now, research shows that even normal vaginal births put 40 to 90 pounds of pulling force on baby's head and neck. And when you add interventions, inductions that create stronger contractions, epidurals that slow labor and create positional stress, forceps that twist and pull, vacuum extractions that apply 50 plus pounds of suction pressure, or C-sections that skip the gradual nervous system activation of a vaginal delivery. You're adding layers of physical stress to the most delicate and underprotected neurological structures within the body. Now, studies show that 80% of babies born via C-section develop sensory processing issues later in life. Up to 90% of newborns have some level of neurospinal misalignment after birth. And the global C-section rate has skyrocketed from 7% in 1990 to 21% today. And it's projected to hit 29% by 2030. Not to mention that the WHO, or the World Health Organization, suggests C-sections should only be utilized 10 to 15% of the time. That means millions of children are walking around with undetected nervous system trauma that's been labeled as behavior, development, or mental health problems. And this is what most people don't understand. When we say birth trauma, we probably think broken bones, nerve injuries, brain bleeds, the severe cases that make the headlines. But the real birth trauma epidemic is invisible. It's the things we can't see. It's the damage to the brainstem, to the upper neck, to our vagus nerve, to the structures that control everything from digestion and sleep to emotional regulation and immune function. Think about the mechanics for a second. A baby's head has to navigate through the birth canal, twisting and molding to fit. And even in the most natural births, there's compression, rotation, and force applied to the structures that are still forming. And now we add interventions like inductions that create artificially strong contractions that don't give the baby time to adjust position gradually. The uterus essentially forces the baby through before they're ready, creating awkward angles and sustained pressure on the head, the neck, the spine. Epidurals can actually slow labor and affect mom's ability to feel and respond to positioning cues, which means babies can get stuck in compromised positions for extended periods. Forceps and vacuums apply direct pulling and twisting force to baby's skull and upper neck, exactly where the brainstem connects to the spinal cord. Now, this is the most neurologically dense area of the entire body, and it's exactly where our vagus nerve originates, where every signal between the brain and the body has to pass through. C-sections skip the entire process of gradual compression and decompression that activates the nervous system for life outside of the womb. Babies born via C-section miss critical neurological priming that happens during vaginal birth. Plus, the rapid extraction can create its own set of mechanical stresses. And here's the part that makes me furious. None of this is screened for. If the baby comes out crying and their APGAR score is decent, everyone assumes everything is fine. But nobody's checking the nervous system. Nobody's evaluating the brainstem. Nobody's measuring vagus nerve function or even spinal alignment. So these babies go home with invisible impact that starts immediately affecting how they eat, how they sleep, how they poop, and how they regulate. And parents are told that it's normal newborn stuff. So let's follow what's actually happening when birth trauma creates stress, subluxation, and dysautonomia within a newborn's nervous system. First, the vagus nerve gets compromised. Now, this nerve is responsible for latching and coordinating their suck, swallow, breathe mechanics. It's responsible for their digestive motility and preventing and slowing down and calming reflux. The vagus nerve plays a big role with regulating our heart rate, our breathing patterns during sleep and awake. It calms the nervous system and activates our rest, digest, parasympathetic mode. Not only that, our vagus nerve supports immune function and whole body inflammation control. Now, when the vagus nerve isn't working properly because of the physical trauma to the brainstem and to the upper neck, you get the opposite. You get nursing difficulties and poor latch, reflux, colic, constipation, sleep fragmentation, and the inability to stay asleep, excessive crying, and inability to self-soothe, frequent illnesses, and weak immune responses. But here's where it gets worse. When a baby's nervous system is stuck in sympathetic fight or flight dominance from day one, they developmentally cannot progress the way that they should. Because remember, we can't be in growth mode and protection mode at the same time. A baby whose nervous system is screaming danger because of stress, subluxation, and vagus nerve dysfunction can't focus on hitting motor milestones like rolling, crawling, walking. They can't develop speech and language in the appropriate timeline. They have difficulties building social and emotional connections. Their processing of sensory input is inappropriate. They can't regulate their emotions or their behavior. So the colic becomes chronic ear infections. The reflux becomes picky eating. The sleep issues become hyperactivity and emotional dysregulation. Those sensory sensitivities become ADHD or anxiety or oppositional defiance disorder. And nobody ever looks back to birth to connect the dots. And instead, parents are spent to specialist after specialist or provider after provider. Speech therapy for language delays, occupational therapy for fine motor and the sensory issues, behavioral therapy for the meltdowns, and medication for the anxiety or the focus problems. And all of it is trying to manage symptoms that stem from a single root cause: nervous system trauma that started at birth. Now, this is critical for parents to understand because birth trauma doesn't always look the same at every age. It evolves as your child develops, or more accurately, as they try to develop despite a dysregulated foundation. For our infants and our small children, 0 to 12 months, we start to see difficulty latching or nursing. We see torticollis, or the head's always turned to one side. We see plagiocephaly, or the flat spot developing because they can't turn their head appropriately. We see excessive colic and crying, or we see a high needs baby. Reflux, constipation, digestive struggles, sleep fragmentation. They won't sleep unless they're held, poor head control, or delayed motor milestones. And as they continue to develop into toddlerhood, you start to see speech delays or difficulty with articulation. You see sensory sensitivities to textures, to sounds, to lights, to food, frequent meltdowns and emotional dysregulation, picky eating or oral aversions, chronic ear infections or respiratory issues, difficulty with transitions, delayed gross motor skills like walking, climbing, coordination. And as that continues into our school age kids, we start to see ADHD symptoms emerge, like focus, impulsivity, or hyperactivity. We see high levels of anxiety, especially with social or even separation anxiety from the parents. Sensory processing disorder starts to emerge. Learning challenges, despite normal intelligence, starts to come on board. Behavioral issues, oppositional defiance, chronic illness and sickness like frequent colds, strep, stomach issues, viruses. We see poor handwriting, coordination difficulties, difficulties with reading. And by the time they're teenagers, we have severe anxiety and panic attacks, depression and mood instability, chronic fatigue, digestive issues like IBS and severe constipation, sleep disorders, emotional dysregulation, social withdrawal, or difficulty with relationships. Do you see this pattern? It's not that your child developed ADHD at age 7. It's that their nervous system has been compensating for the trauma since birth. And by age 7, the system couldn't compensate for it anymore. The cracks in the foundation finally caused the house to start crumbling. And this is what makes me furious on behalf of every parent that we see. Traditional medicine doesn't even look for this because your pediatrician checks their growth charts, their developmental milestones, kind of, and whether the baby is thriving from a weight and height perspective. But they don't evaluate what's going on within the neurospinal system. They don't look at brainstem function. They don't look at vagus nerve tone or autonomic nervous system balance. Now, neurologists may run MRIs or EEGs looking for structural brain damage or seizure activity, but those tests don't detect dysautonomia or nervous system dysregulation. They don't look at fight or flight dominance or vagus nerve suppression. Now, the therapists, which I love, they work on the symptoms, teaching speech, improving motor skills, managing behavior, but they're not addressing the neurological foundation that's preventing those systems from working properly in the first place. It's like trying to get better Wi-Fi by restarting your devices over and over without ever checking if the router is broken or disconnected. The problem isn't that your child can't focus. The problem is that their nervous system is overloaded with noise and can't process input clearly. The problem isn't that they're bad or they're difficult. The problem is that they're stuck on fight or flight and they can't access the part of the nervous system that regulates behavior and emotions. And the problem started at birth, but nobody measured it. Now, here's the beautiful part of this. And this is where we start to transform lives every single week within our office. When we use neurologically focused chiropractic care to address the stress, the subluxation, and vagus nerve dysfunction that birth trauma created, the body can finally do what it was designed to do: heal, regulate, and develop. Now, we use the advanced insight scans to measure exactly where the nervous system is stuck in stress mode. Now, our scans show us where stress and subluxation patterns are creating the interference, how dysregulated the autonomic nervous system actually is, and how much capacity your child has left in their nervous system tank, as well as where vagus nerve dysfunction is impacting function. And then through gentle, specific, precise chiropractic care, nothing like the aggressive cracking that you might imagine or see on TikTok or social media, we help the nervous system release the tension and trauma that it's been holding onto since birth. And this is what parents report. Latching improves within days. Colic and crying decreases dramatically. Sleep lengthens and deepens. Digestion regulates. Their developmental milestones start clicking into place. For our toddlers and for our young kids, we see speech accelerate. Their sensory challenges calm down. Meltdowns decrease in frequency and intensity. Their eating expands. Immune system strengthens. For our school age kids, focus and attention improves. Anxiety decreases. behavior stabilizes, sleep quality improves, academic performance increases. And for our teens and adults, moods stabilize, anxiety starts to lift, energy returns. Our digestion starts to regulate, social engagement improves. It's not magic, it's neurology. When you remove the stress and interference that birth trauma created, the nervous system can finally shift out of survival mode, take a breath, and into growth mode. The vagus nerve actually activates. The parasympathetic system comes back online, and the body stops fighting itself and starts healing. And everything else, the therapies, the interventions, the support finally has a foundation to build on. Now, if your child's experienced any level of birth intervention, inductions, epidurals, forceps, vacuum, C-sections, or even just a long or fast labor, their nervous system experienced trauma, period. And if they're now showing any of the signs that we've talked about, sleep, digestive, developmental delays, sensory processing, behavioral problems, anxiety, or focus issues, it's time to stop managing the symptoms and start addressing the root cause. Our team at Haven Family Chiropractic, right here in Katy, Texas, specializes in identifying and correcting the nervous system damage that birth trauma creates. We don't guess. We measure it with the advanced insight scans, and we've helped hundreds of families watch their children transform when the foundation finally gets addressed. Now, we're running our end of year, beginning of year gift of health campaign. So for $97 as opposed to $325, you get a complete neurological consultation. The insight scans, the thermal, the muscle tension, and heart rate variability depending on their age, and comprehensive report of findings where I'll show you exactly what's happening in your child's nervous system. And you get a $300 credit towards their initial restoration care plan if you decide to move forward. Now, this evaluation is what every child deserves, but almost never gets. It's the missing piece that connects everything that you've been seeing but couldn't explain. So click the link in our bio, send us a DM to be able to book your gift of health appointment, because your child's struggles aren't their fault and they're not your fault. They're the result of a nervous system trauma that nobody looked for and nobody addressed. So let's change that. Let's give your child the foundation that they deserve, so everything else that you're doing can finally work the way it was meant to.